name is Katrin, and thank you for joining us in this extremely special reading of Geshe Michael Roach's newest book. The book is Katrin. Go do that. And tonight is the last of this 3-part reading series. So we left off last time at the end of an intense debate battle. And our main character finally revealed that she was the brains behind Didila. So we were left with her running as fast as she could away from the crowd. So, grab a box of tissues and some popcorn, and I'll pass it over to you, Geshe Michael.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, here we go. I'm going to be looking at my other screen, which is the text itself. Okay, here we go. Chapter 41, Inside. On the big day, Uncle and I left some of the caravan women with Amala, and then we started off along the shortcut over the Slate Ridge, the route that Uncle always took to the monastery when he was in a hurry. Not that we were late, but Uncle was all nerves again, and he wanted to make extra sure that he got a good seat in the row reserved for the senior teachers. I had chosen to wear a simple old dress of mine, partly in protest of the finery that most people would wear, and partly to help reinforce my new image as a quiet and obedient country girl. I wore Tenzin's beads around my neck, as any other country girl would wear theirs, and the turquoise mother bead tapped against my nervous heart as we walked along. The stone felt warm there, almost hot, as if it were charged with some kind of wonderful power from all the prayers I had done over it. Long Life walked alongside me until we were past the ridge. And then he let me know that he expected to be carried the rest of the way in the baby sling. My little lion was becoming a real aristocrat's lapdog, but I enjoyed pampering him, as did the whole family, especially when he did his tricks at mealtimes. The wall around the courtyard was already nearly filled with villagers as we arrived. Uncle left me at a pretty good spot, not far from the gate, which put me almost directly behind the attacker's back. Then, as he turned to enter the courtyard, Uncle threw one last significant glance towards my hands for added emphasis, and I nodded back with my new obedience-style smile. If the crowd before had been large, this one was massive by the time the great gong was sounded. Drum and Didilas was the final battle of the Geshe examinations for the year, since the first pair to fight did their second debate last, and no one had forgotten their opening encounter. 4 other warriors had been awarded Geshe hats, including both Stick and Hammer. Stick had done so well during his second battle that the judges had granted him the extra distinction of 3rd rank. And our class leader, the quiet, sincere one, had earned the 2nd rank. 2 such awards were considered exceptional for 1 year's new crop of Geshes. And Drum would really have to work today if he hoped to win any extra rank at all. As for Didila, we were all just hoping for a graceful defeat that would justify the precious one's decision to give him back his hat. The same procession as before repeated itself then. The high lamas led by the debate master, my dear mentor, Geshe Lothar. The weather was sparkling clear, the sky a crystal blue, and the sun a glorious gold shining across the golden roofs. It even bathed the founding father as he passed nearby, looking relaxed for once. And then came the two warriors. Drum was his usual powerful presence, and even Didila at his side looked bright and chipper. I guess it was the season, or the sun, or the knowledge that this was really the very last day of testing. Or perhaps somehow everyone felt what was about to happen. I'll never know for sure. Luckily, Didila came through on the left side, over close to me, and I was able at the last moment, before he reached the gate, to lunge through a few bystanders and thrust out my hand with Tenzin's beads. Didila looked over at me calmly, as if this were all part of the normal proceedings, and he accepted the beads gracefully with both hands. Then he stopped right there in the middle of everything and slowly removed the old chipped beads from his own wrist and gave them to me as Drum stood watching, not with a look of annoyance at the interruption, strangely, but with a sort of honest interest. And then they were on their way to that innocent little bench, the crucible in which Geshes were forged. The crowd and I settled down at the wall to wait for the opening prayers to finish. And the ancient ones, 100 warriors, took their seats on the timber platform behind the center wall. "Excuse me, my lady." I didn't even turn to see who was talking. My lady was reserved for women of nobility and not for country girls. My lady, Miss Friday, niece to the master teacher himself. This time I turned, I suppose with a look of some astonishment, because the young monk at my side blushed and said, "Not to disturb you, my lady, but I have been sent by the debate master, who wishes that you would please come with me, if you would." I felt a pang in my heart. So even Geshe Lothar was afraid to have me anywhere near the founding father. I shrugged and followed the young monk to the back of the crowd. No use ruining my obedient act before it even got started. Somewhere in the back there, we were met by a chubby little novice, about 10 years old, carrying a bag almost bigger than he was. From there, the three of us did a wide circle through the fields and came around to the far side of the timber platform. The young monk had been given a stout oaken staff that served to identify him as an official from the monastery. And people made way for us as we threaded our way up to the front of the timbers. We stopped there right at the wall, and the young monk boosted himself up onto the platform. Then he turned and put his hand out to help me up. I was completely confused, and I stopped there cold, like a mule. "Please, my lady, debate master's orders, and this is his courtyard. Please." I put out my hand and he pulled me up. I looked around and I saw that this little corner of the platform had been roped off for special guests. Sitting there on big plush cushions were several noblemen and their ladies. No one I had ever seen, and I realized that they were probably patrons of the Ancient One's monastery, out to have a fine day in the country and enjoy the spectacle. Right there in front of me was a very stuffy looking matron with a daughter my age sitting on each side. They all had their hair done up the way that aristocratic ladies in our country used to wear it. Their lovely, long, lovely tresses coming up over the top of their heads on little wooden supports that looked like crowns, with their hair wrapped around and then studded with ornaments of red coral. Coral in our country was extremely rare and precious since we are so far from the sea, and there was more of it loaded on each woman's head than I had seen in my entire life. They gave me a long stare, and then their eyes traveled across my worn out farm dress and the bright country girl's apron. And then a moment later, they were gazing back at the pavilion, satisfied that there was nothing more about me to see. Here, please, my lady. Very specific. Geshe Lothar was very specific. Said you had to be right here. And the young monk motioned to the very front of the platform, where it met the opening for a gate into the courtyard. The gate itself was pushed open the other way, and monks were sitting up against the wood. But a small patch of courtyard had been left free just inside the frame. Then the monk waved to the little novice, who opened up his bag and handed up a big, fine cushion, the kind that, say, a chanting master would sit on. My jaw dropped, and a little rustle went through the three coral heads. Big cushions are a big deal in our country. The monk arranged it neatly on the edge of the platform, right at the opening in the wall. Then he reached down to the novice and pulled up a fine golden seat cover, also normally reserved for, say, a monk who was already a Geshe. My jaw dropped further, and I was afraid to even glance at the expressions behind me. The young monk didn't take any chances at that point. He fairly pushed me down on the cushion there and then, came around to the front and said, "One more thing, my lady, if you please." Very specific he was, you see, and I know he will check. So please, just make my life easier. Geshe Lothar says specifically that you are to sit like Maitreya, the loving one. Now, the loving one, if you don't already know, is like a junior angel. That is, he's supposed to be the next awakened one to show up in our world. And whereas almost all the other angels in pictures and such are sitting cross-legged, like everyone in Tibet and India does too, well, loving one sits up on a chair, the way people do in your Western countries nowadays, with his feet down on the ground. This is all to signify that he's on his way here to our world, even as we speak. And so to spare the young monk any trouble with the debate master, who I knew could also be a real taskmaster if he felt a young monk were shirking his duty, I pulled my dress around me and tucked it under, and I swung my feet down to the opening in the wall. And I looked down and I saw that my toes, just the very tips of my toes, were actually inside the debate courtyard. The young monk leaned over and seemed to check on this very same thing. And then he straightened up and smiled and said, "Thank you, my lady. and he jumped back down, melting into the crowd. I glanced down gratefully at the chubby little novice. He gave me a big happy wink that I'm sure he learned from Geshe Lothar himself. And then he and his empty bag were gone too. I pulled my little lion out of his sling, and he settled comfortably into my lap, and we turned our eyes back to the battle. Chapter 42, Angel came down. In that same moment, that chanting suddenly stopped, and a hush descended, it seemed, over the whole earth itself. Even the song of the birds was still. Even the wind held its breath. Didila rose softly from his seat, clasping Tenzing's beads now between both his hands, and he stepped out before the bench, which is where the attacker must stand. He turned quietly, his tiny shoulders slumped, and his head bowed low, and he reached up to remove the corner of his monk shawl in the customary salute to his opponent. Drome nodded back gracefully in a strange serenity that matched the mood of the whole world around us. Then Didila raised his arm, his left arm, high into the air, thrusting Tenzing beads to the sky. Every person there paused and held their breath and waited for the cry to battle, the sacred sound of wisdom, the sound of Di. My eye caught for a split second on the turquoise mother bead, hanging there in the blue of the sky, sparkling in the sun. Didila cried out, Di! And in the same instant, a golden bolt of sunlight seemed to strike the hand in the air, bursting down his body like lightning. He cried out again, a strange high cry that could not be a word. And his other hand flew up in the sky too. He lifted up high on his toes, and his head snapped back, and his spine arched impossibly, as if someone had kicked him hard there. In the center of his back, his wide, scared eyes spread ever so wider, staring at the sky in a kind of shock, like sockets in a skull. And then suddenly he cried, Di again, leaping high into the air and whirling all the way around. Di again, leaping to the left, past the front row of astonished senior monks. Then Di, and he spun incredibly twice in midair, dancing across the pavilion and vaulting over the opposite row of classmates, who as one raised their hands in an instinctive jerk to cover their heads. Then Di, with, was it 6 or 7 spins in the air, maybe touching the ground, maybe not, flying past the judges on their 3 thrones. And then one last extraordinary leap, like a deer. One leg pointed ahead and the other pointed behind, his robes flying back in long golden streams, high into the air, over the bench, over Drome's head and head, singing out, Di all the way. And he landed somehow exactly as he had started, facing Drome, both hands thrown high to the sky in joy, his head thrown back in exultation. And I could swear that for a split second, he had beautiful long black hair flowing down past his shoulders, and bracelets of purest gold shining in the sun on his wrists. And instead of robes, he wore just the purest shimmering veils of golden silk floating down around his strong, lovely, slender, golden figure. He was gentle voice. He was the angel of wisdom himself. And he sang out then like a great bell, Di, I am Di, I am Didila. I have to believe that Drome saw the same thing, because he sat on the bench transfixed, staring dumbfounded at little old Didila. And Didila, it was Didila now, I guess, raised his eyes to Drome with the warmest smile I have ever seen. And he said in a loud, clear, friendly voice, "Now today, my brother, let us talk together. Let us talk together about kindness, kindness." And then he paused, and the silence around us was deafening. No one had even remembered to breathe again. Drum nodded, stunned, without a word. The master, in his book on reasoning, he starts out by saying that he has written the book only to help himself understand the subject more clearly and not for anyone else's benefit. Now, we clearly cannot take this statement literally, can we? This is what I think he's really trying to say. And Didila, or whoever it was, went on like that for 2, 3, 4 hours, leading drum and leading the rest of us, leading us by the hand, guiding us like a father would his beloved child through a lovely glade of green trees with soft shafts of warm golden sunlight filtering in through the leaves across a soft mossy path weaved between delicate, fragrant ferns. It was not a battle, or like no battle the courtyard had ever witnessed. It was a symphony. It was the sound of gentle waves on the shore. It was the eloquence of silence itself. Drum sat perched on the edge of the bench, very straight, his face in the bright, beautiful smile of a happy child, as Didila gently led him on down the lovely path of lovely ideas, holy ideas, ideas about kindness, ideas about goodness, ideas about compassion, all flowing one into the other, each one proving the next, each one establishing with the iron necessity of pure logic why every suffering living being on this planet should and must devote themselves to serving everyone else. My lady, a voice shook me out of the trance of this most gentle war. I still wasn't used to the words ever being addressed to myself. My lady, repeated the voice. It was a tall, thin novice of about 15 years, calling up to the platform from among the crowd pressed happily to the wall, all in a trance of their own. I automatically glanced behind me at the coral head trio to see which one he was talking to. They all had turned their heads demurely to the monk, as a my lady should. My lady, Mistress Friday, is there a Mistress Friday among you? Called the monk politely. The coral heads looked around them, a bit confused, and then shook their heads. That would be me, I said a little nervously, raising my hand slightly. Oh yes, said the monk, thank you. And he held his arm up high over the crowd and waved towards the back. And then before I knew it, there were 3 more young monks clambering up onto the platform around Long Life and I. One set a little wooden table down at my side. It was made of fine, dark hardwood, carved into intricate figures of wild animals and fantastic eagles and dragons. The second monk whipped out a small green tablecloth of Indian brocade, covered the table, and set down there a beautiful wooden spoon, after making a great fuss about wiping it to a shine with a pure white linen napkin. And then the third monk carefully placed there a handmade silver bowl with a matching silver lid that had all kinds of silver filigree all over it. Then finally, the tall, thin one stepped up, positioned a lovely Chinese ceramic cup at just the right angle to the bowl. And he poured out a fine golden tea from a small churn, which he then placed at the side of the table. Compliments of the master cook, my lady, he smiled then. Says you will understand. Careful of the bowl now, it's a bit hot. I smiled back without any comprehension, and all four jumped back to the ground and disappeared among the people, who I noticed now were handing each other wooden bowls of hot tea, pushing them into each other's hands with odd, huge smiles all over their faces. And they all stood there staring at Didila, strolling with Drome through the leafy glade of ideas, enjoying the warmth of the bowls in their hands as the evening chill began, completely forgetting to drink. I waited respectfully for the grace to be sung by the chanting master and the assembled monks, even as Drome and Didila continued their communion. And then I took a quick gulp of wonderful spiced tea and slowly raised the lid from the bowl. And then I started to cry right there under the glares of the coral heads, pretty loud. I couldn't help it. Inside the bowl, there was just a simple porridge mixed with little orange slices of dried apricot and a kind of walnut we have called karga. And maybe if you had been there, you would have thought it looked rather ordinary. But in the courtyard, you see, among the warriors, this particular porridge is only served once a year because it is the Geshe tupa, the Geshe's porridge, and it is offered only to those who have just won their Geshe hat. Chapter 43, the final proof. I ate about half the Geshe porridge just for good luck. Who could taste anything with the delightful music emanating from the warriors? Then with a naughty little smile to myself, I set the silver bowl with the rest of the porridge down on the platform to my left, where the coral heads would be sure to see it, and I let Long Life down to lap some of it up. This got a bit of a from behind me, and I was in such a good mood that I held the exquisite teacup down and let Long Life have some of that too. Then after that, I raised it to my own lips and gulped down the rest. This got a from the all three. I was considering fishing a piece of walnut out of the leftovers to hold it up so my little lion could get up and do his prayers and then leap to the air and grab the walnut in his mouth when I yelled, "Vam!" But the battle quote was just too fascinating to miss a moment more. Didila was leaning towards Drome with intensity. And so you see, our habit of taking care only of ourselves, our habit of taking care only of what's on this side of the edge of our skin, it really is just a habit. And like any habit, we could, with steady practice, change it into a different habit. That is, we could train ourselves to see ourselves bigger than the edge of our own skins. Why? We could in time see ourselves stretch across the edge of other people's skins. And then we would take care of others just the way we take care of ourselves. Because now our habit would be to actually be inside them, taking care of them because we take care of ourselves. And can you imagine what the world would be like if everyone picked up this new habit? Wouldn't it be wonderful? Drome let out a delighted giggle and gushed, "Why, I never thought of that." Didila paused with a happy smile and then took Drome's mind by the hand again and led him even deeper. I chanced to glance at the three judges. The abbot, the precious one, was holding his own beads up to his heart happily, his head cocked to the side and his eyes fixed on the lovely being in front of Drome. The ancient one was leaning back in his throne like a little kid, his hands down on either side of his hips, his entire face lit up with that big, unabashed, toothless grin. And the founding father, who in fact had been no mean warrior himself in his day, was leaning far over the front of his throne, straining to catch every nuance of Didila's flow. Every once in a while, right after a crucial point had been made, he would snap back up straight again with a tremendous smile and a shake of his head as if to say, amazing. Well, I never thought of that either. Then suddenly a call floated up from the crowd at my side. My lady, excuse me, my lady. I took a wicked peek at the coral heads. They glared down at the monk, and then all three very slowly raised their arms and pointed silently at me. Oh yes, my lady, Mistress Friday. It was a very handsome young monk whom I recognized from my trips to the scriptorium to collect the precious scraps of paper. I am Friday, I said shyly, somewhat abashed. He stood there squeezed between the dreamy-eyed spectators, pulled a shoulder bag around in front of him, and fished inside of it for a moment. Then he took out a small package wrapped in a brilliant crimson cloth and handed it up to me with gentle respect. A gift, he called. A gift for you from the master calligrapher, my lady. He said you would understand. I accepted the package with a look of surprise. The handsome young monk nodded with a pleasant smile, waved a little goodbye, and melted back into the crowd. My hands were trembling. I set the gift in its precious cloth down on the lovely little table. Long Life was curious and poked his nose at the package. He felt the energy coming from the thing, and I could fairly feel the breaths of the coral heads down my neck as they too craned ahead to see what it was. There was a silver-colored ribbon sewn to the cloth, and I unwrapped it slowly. The last fold of cloth slid off, and there in my hands was an exquisite manuscript, all on fine parchment, with fresh calligraphy done in a true master's hand. Each letter was like a work of art in itself. The top page said the three foundations, and when I saw it, I started to weep again. For this is a traditional collection of 3 of the 5 great books into one volume to make them easy to memorize. And it is a gift that is often made to a new Geshe, who together with his new hat has just earned the responsibility of passing the great books on to his own students. I turned the page over, and there through my tears, I could see the line, the first line that Tenzin and I had ever heard, those who listen, seeking peace. The tears burst out even stronger, and I heard a low murmur of sympathy escape from the lips of the ladies behind. I began to close and rewrap the book, and I caught a glimpse of a little box drawn in the center of the first page of the first book. It was a custom to draw there the figure of some great teacher of the past. The caption below the box said, Master Dharmakirti. I smiled because this was the very master from ancient India whose book Didila and Drum were traveling through now. It was an illustration of extraordinarily fine detail. This Lama is always drawn as a wisdom warrior, an attacker, with his hand held high, ready to come down in a tremendous clap, and a string of beads flying to the side from the wrist of his upstretched hand. And then something more caught my eye, and I peered down. Beneath the Lama's tall hat were drawn a few thin lines, coming down the side of his face, almost as though instead of the close-cropped hair of a monk, he might have very long hair, perhaps tied back behind his head. And then I saw that his features were decidedly soft, nearly feminine, and that there was a low wall sketched in behind him across the background, and the tiniest chip of turquoise had been glued there into the beads flying from his hand. It was no use crying even more. I just laughed and shook my head and looked up again to my brothers. Suddenly, the debate master stepped out to the front of the bench. My eyes and 1,000 others broke away for a moment from Didila. We all looked around in amazement. The daylight was gone. No, it was in fact well into the night. Someone had come and set out torches and left. Bowls full of cold, untouched tea were spread all over the top of the wall. And the night air was cold, freezing cold. Groggy people everywhere, monk and villager, were coming out of their trances and reaching to pull on cloaks and coats to bundle themselves up. Didila had been standing well back away from the examination bench, guiding Drum and all the rest of us through a few final thoughts, like dessert after a wonderful meal. Every once in a while, his hands came down in a clap that was nothing like a warrior's finger splitter. It was more like a puff of fragrance or a pillow that left his palms and floated off to his opponent as a kind of gift. But now Didila paused and broke his eyes away from Drum's for the first time. Drum glanced around sleepily, like a child gently woken from a pleasant nap. Didila glanced at Geshe Lothar and gave a brief, respectful nod, for stepping forward was the traditional signal that the debate master wanted the attacker to pose the final proof. And the proof in the final examination of a Geshe is always the same, even to this day. Didila straightened up tall and mighty and graceful as any warrior who had ever stood in the courtyard. Then he approached Drum slowly and stopped only a foot or two away, as is the ancient custom for the final proof. There will never come a day, he said softly, when every living creature upon this entire earth is freed from every form of pain and even death itself. Drum's eyes and his face and his whole being gleamed in pure devotion. Not so, he called out powerfully. And why not, called back Didila with the same power, tears bursting from his eyes, streaming down his cheeks. Because truth, and here Drum as well burst into tears of total joy, because truth is infinitely more powerful than all the illusions we live in. It must prevail. It will, he cried, prevail. And Didila bowed to Drum and to the truth. And then he sat down on the bench and put his arm around the big shoulders. There was not a sound anywhere. The debate master returned to the back of the bench behind Drum. He set his hands there softly on the same shoulders. He turned and raised his head proudly and looked to the three thrones. The precious one gazed down at the scene before him with a look of infinite tenderness and happiness. And he and all of us paused there for a long moment to cherish what had passed, to remember it. And then he raised his hand and held up his first two fingers. The founding father beamed and nodded gently. The ancient one touched two fingers to his forehead in agreement and an ancient sign of respect. And so it was decided, second rank, high honor, something to treasure for the whole rest of a life. And then Geshe Lautar placed his hands ever so slowly upon Didila's shoulders. Those thin little shoulders stooped over again like Didila's as the boy stared at the ground, almost looking nervous again. The precious one cocked his head and cracked a big grin and held up one finger very high towards the stars. The founding father looked down at little Didila, his eyes all soft and glazed over, still in the spell of the sacred thoughts the warriors had weaved that night, and he nodded slowly, a single tear of happiness tracing its way down his iron features. And lastly, the ancient one just threw up his hands happily as to say, well, what else? There were no cheers. Custom was forgotten, and no one leapt up to wave their hat. Someone in the courtyard, someone up towards the front, I will never know who, stood up silently. He bowed slowly towards the warriors, pressing his palms together in front of his heart. Our age-old expression of respect and devotion. Then one by one, other people stood and did the same, still in total silence. And then everyone was up and bowing, and I could hear people around me beginning to sob quietly at the beauty, at the truth itself, the truth of kindness. The high lamas came down off their thrones, and a path parted silently before them out of the courtyard, back to the gate in the great wall of the monastery. And last came the two warriors, arm in arm, crying and smiling. Long Life and I went and shared a big warm hug with the three delighted coral heads. And then I ran to find Uncle in the crowd. Okay, that's the end of tonight's reading and that final debate of Katrin. There's a lot more in the book, but you have to read it. Connie? I thought, oh, somebody wants a bedtime story every night. Yeah. Okay. Connie, I think did you have Q&A or we were going to do that or are we going to skip that? I don't know.
Geshe, how about we skip it for tonight?
Yeah.
That was just wonderful, just as it was. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good weekend. Take a good rest. The book's available in audio next week. The book's available in print already. The ebook is available. Here's the QR code. And I hope you enjoy it. And maybe you can read it to your partner or your kids at night. Okay. And thank you, Connie and Bob and Earl and Sarah and all the other Lydia mom. Thank you all for keeping YSI going. Thank you for the hard work it takes to keep it in the world. And I'm really, really grateful to you guys. Okay. Thank you, translators. I hope it wasn't too slow or too fast. But it takes a lot of courage to translate, you know, a verbal teaching. So thank you very much. I know it's very tiring and I know it's very hard. So everyone, please have a nice break on the weekend. And next story will be next week will be a review of the whole Yoga Sutra, and we'll have fun together. Okay, thank you again, you guys. Bye.
Ah, thank you, Geshe Michael. That was so beautiful. Geshe shared a lot of what you can already do to get the book. So go ahead, get that ebook. You have the QR code there. And the audiobook is out on Monday, so get that too. Maybe you can listen to the audiobook and follow along with the ebook, whatever you need to do. Um, Thanks again to the translators and everyone else who made this possible. Thank you, Geshe Michael. Everyone, enjoy the story, and we'll see you next time.